and get things started off here with Armada. And Armada, some of you might already be familiar with the org. They were typically a top 1, top 2 team for the SML throughout season 5, and they've undergone a lot of roster changes in their time in the Smite minor league. But this is without a doubt probably the strongest roster that we have ever seen from Armada. Snoopy in the hunter role, Geno in support role, Meerkat, Scream, Baskin. Already you have a lot of veteran experience on this team, and so I think that that's going to it kind of shifts them, I think, towards being like the number 1 team as is, just because you've got so many top ranking players. Baskin, heavily regarded as, the world's best mid laner for a long period of time, has gone back to his former role. He will be playing solo, which is where he debuted with his SPL career. So it's going to be really interesting seeing how he readjusts, because back when Baskin was a solo laner, I think that Warriors were a little bit more dominant, but there are going to be some new changes coming in with Season 6 as well, that Warriors are provided a little bit more tankiness, I think, and Baskin can really fill this role well if he's able to pick up where he left off. But he's a really strong player, mechanically speaking. He's got a lot of player knowledge to boot, so that's already probably one of the most solid choices you could have looked towards in the solo lane here. So Armada starting off strong with the solo laner. Scream, I mean, the name speaks for itself. You saw this guy all over the place through his SPL career. I think he's stepping back because Scream is still in high school. He wants to finish up high school before moving, and completely understandable. Or he wants to just focus on his last year of schooling, and that's cool. So he's going to be filling in for the Smite minor league for right now. But in the jungle role for Armada, I think that he's going to be able to play off of Baskin quite well. These two are already so familiar with each other that I think the synergy will be there. And Meerkat, talking about Spinergy, it kind of just adds straight onto the pile. I mean, this entire roster is, in all honesty, a team full of players that are very familiar with each other. They know the ins and outs of each other's playstyles. They know what each other's god pools are like. So I think that Armada is already getting started off on the right foot, just because their team carries so much synergy within the roster as a whole. And I'm really excited to see how this team continues to perform, or how this team does perform in the SML, because I could definitely see some losing clauses involved with this team, in that this is also a team of tilters. And what I mean by that is, this is a team where I think if Scream, Geno, Baskin get behind, mostly Scream, Baskin, if things aren't picture perfect for Scream and Baskin, I could definitely see this team getting really tilted, and that could possibly impact their gameplay. But I do believe that the likelihood of that happening would be very, it's pretty unlikely that that would be the case. But I think that what we can expect to see against most teams when they play up against Armada is probably just to look for pure early game dominance against this team. Because if you can get them, all flustered in the early game, I think that that could definitely impact their synergy and how they continue to play throughout the rest of the match in the mid to late. So really, really fun stuff here already, though, with this roster. I think Armada as a whole, you can't really go wrong. Geno as well. I think his season 5 SPL career was, I don't think that he was really able to showcase everything that he was capable of. Being on Luminosity, he underwent a lot of roster shifts and shakeups, and at one point even found himself in the mid lane role, basically just trying to fill, because at the time they felt that there wasn't anybody better for that position. And so now that he's going back to his original role of support, very happy to see this role swap back. I think that it's a super fitting role for Geno. He's got really strong map awareness inside of team fights, and I respect the level of patience that he has at times. And I think that he'll be a great support to help guide this team around their objective play, because he's really open minded. So this might be one of the better opportunities that we will get to see how Geno's time in the SPL is going to transition over into the SML, now that he's technically competing in a lower, um well, I don't want to say lower skill pool, because there's a lot of skillful players, or a lot of skilled players in the NASML and European SML. But I mean, there is a difference between pro play and minor league play to an extent. I think that this could be the very first season where we don't really notice that much of a difference between the two, because there are just so many veteran players competing in the SML this season. And Snoopy, not really much to be said here. Snoopy's just consistent. I think he's a really consistent hunter, and sometimes he'll be down to make a play. So I think that this is the team that you're going to be looking for if you want to see the flashy stuff come out. Moving on to Out Cold Gaiman, and I already saw a few people talking about the fact that they think Out Cold is going to be slept on. For those of you who are already unaware, Emilito is not unfamiliar to support role in the slightest. He has oftentimes, I think, even streamed himself a few times playing supports in the dual lane role. I think that he's just tired of playing ADC, wants to shake things up for a little bit, so he's decided to go on over to support. It'll be interesting to see what his playstyle is like surrounding this new role swap because of the fact that support isn't like ADC. You can afford to be a little bit more aggressive, I think, right now from the support role than what you can from Hunter. I am expecting this to be a hyper aggressive dual lane between the two, and I'm also expecting to see heavy pressure dual lanes between Spudio and Emilito. Spudio's God Pool, also one that I think will kind of reflect a little bit of Emilito. Because Spudio, he likes the ROM, he likes the hyper carries. I wouldn't even be surprised to see him maybe even try to flex into that Chronos ADC from time to time, much like that of his dual lane partner from the past. So this is going to be a really strong dual lane, a really aggressive dual lane that the other teams in the European SML are sure to have to keep an eye on. Because if you let this lane run uncontrolled, I think that they will definitely be able to influence the pacing of a match. Moving on to Pretty Prime in the mid lane. Prime starting up with his family. Again, congratulations to Prime, and hoping the very best for him and his little fam and everybody over there. But Pretty Prime in mid lane, it's hard to go wrong with that. The dude just knows his stuff. It's really good for this team as well because Frostiak just recently came back into competitive play. He took a little bit of a break and also spent a little bit of time kind of watching from outside of the window. He didn't really have a chance to come back into competitive play because during his time with Dignitas, which was the last team he competed on before he came back in Season 5, I think he definitely struggled a little bit towards the end there with Dignitas, and that it definitely
Taco, let's go
influenced.
still my fab
Oh,
Smite streamer, you da best.
thanks, Cthulhu. Appreciate that. But yeah, getting back to things, Frostiak is a really hit or miss type of jungler. And the reason why I say that is because for the longest time, everybody who's been around Smite for a while could tell you the same thing. Frostiak is somebody who he will always, or I should say almost always, probably 99% of the time, Frostiak will either get first blood or he will be first blooded. But he is almost always involved with whatever first blood happens when it takes place on the map. And I think where Pretty Prime comes into play here is with Frostiak being so inconsistent at times, I think we saw a lot more consistency from him in Season 5 when he was trying to help the guys make it to Worlds and everything, but they just fell short. I still think that Frostiak did a pretty solid job on Mouse. Because I do believe he was, yeah, it was with Mouse. He was with those guys because they ended up not qualifying for Worlds, and everybody was blown away by that. But I gotta say, I think that Frosty is kind of slept on a little bit as a jungler, and with Pretty Prime to help lead him and help, I think, keep Frostiak in check. That's a very scary mid jungle combination between the two because Frosty, he's got his God pool that he knows what works best for him. I think you're looking at Susana, you're looking at Humbats, and possibly even the Mercury making a comeback. It all just kind of depends. I would like to see him be a little bit more flexible in Season 6, but I think that a lot of what Frostiak does should definitely be a direct correlation to whatever Pretty Prime is trying to make happen from mid. And last but not least, you got Demi. Demi is somebody who's, again, he's another person who took a little bit of a break from SPL play, but I mean, he's a two-time world champion player, and skill like that doesn't tend to go away all that fast. I think that coming into Season 6 is probably one of the best solo lane environments that Demi could have chosen to come back for in competitive play, just because of the fact that there is going to be a lot more impact, I think, from solo lane now that there's the Totemaku to help be a little bit more involved with the game and its pacing, as well as the fact that Demi has always been a player that has kept the better interest of the team in mind as opposed to his better interest for his laning phase. He's someone who's willing to sacrifice his laning phase if it means a better team fight overall. And that's why I think that this could also be a very hard, if not one of the best, like EUSML rosters out there. Moving on though, and this I already mentioned this. This Space Station Gold is incorrect. This information here. I tried to let the admin team know earlier, but I think that some accidents happen. So Uzi and Oswald still weren't switched around. Chapo was at least switched around back to his current position, but Uzi is the solo laner. Oswald is the hunter player. This is just incorrect information here. It's fine. Don't worry about it. But anyway, starting off with the dual lane, it's going to be Oswald and Matty Pocket. Yeah, okay. Yeah. We'll see. I'm just gonna roast this team the entire time. No, but in all seriousness, it's kind of cool to see. Because you got like new player blood and like the old player blood coming in to like do the fusion dance in the dual lane. So I'm really excited to see what Maddie's going to bring to the table when he was competing in pro play a while back, way back in the day. I think ALG was actually the last time, Team Allegiance was the last time that we saw Maddie play competitive, and so he definitely sat on the back burners for a while before deciding to jump back in. I know that this is something he views to just be a really fun experience, a good learning experience as well, and kind of a soft introduction back to competitive play. I don't think that Maddie felt like he was currently capable of jumping straight into SPL. It's a very steep commitment. I know he probably could have swung, like, believe it or not, he definitely could have swung an SPL team. He had some people talking to him, but he just didn't feel like he was ready at the time, and I have to agree with him. I think that when you spend that long outside of competitive play, it's probably best to take baby steps as opposed to just trying to sprint the whole 9 yards. But I'm really interested to see what Maddie and Oswald are able to bring about, because this is, Maddie kind of having a second stab towards competitive, and this is Oswald getting his first chance. And Oswald is probably going to be the bigger player to keep an eye on here to see how he performs from the Hunter role, because Hunter as a whole, ADC is very limited in terms of what you can do from a competitive standpoint. A lot of teams have been abusing this throughout all of season 5, where they would basically just cyberbully the duo lane and just gank them relentlessly, starting from like a minute 40 into the match and onwards. And so dual lane still kind of carries that stigma that you can't really be uh, you can't really afford to be too aggressive without trusting your mid jungle. And I mention that because Chapo and Mask, I don't think people realize how nasty this is actually going to be. Mask is, I have always been a fan of Mask from the jungle role. I still think that Mask is a top 3 jungler in the world. Like, whether you guys want to agree with me or not, I completely understand. Everybody's got their own takes on things, but I've watched a lot of competitive Smite in the past couple of years, man. And even if you count the time before I was even a caster for high res, I still had to watch a lot of competitive Smite. And Mask was always somebody that impressed me with his mechanical prowess. I am really looking forward to seeing what Chapo and Mask can bring about, because Chapo is a really aggressive player. Mask, I think, will finally get a chance to not be so limited, because I think a lot of the mid laners that Mask has played with in the past have had a little bit more of a passive play style, but it could also work against them if they're not careful. I think that if Chapo and Mask aren't careful, they could definitely get themselves in trouble by overextending. So that'll be the big thing to keep an eye out for. But comms should definitely be strong in this team. I think we're looking more directly towards Chapo and Mask to be kind of the shot callers here. Maddie will probably be more of a directional force from the dual lane, and kind of just leaving Oswald to focus on his own role. I think the big thing for Oswald especially is just that he's just going to need to play it smart. He can't let the chance to finally showcase what he's got interfere with his, like, he can't let the nerves get to him essentially. And I know that you guys are going to be like, oh, it's just a minor league, well, why would he be nervous? But believe it or not, I mean, it's not easy just showing up on a stage, and this is a pretty big name roster to be on, because you got Maddie, Chapo, and Mass. Like, those are 3 players that are very well known in the Smite scene. And I know for a fact that Mask has definitely got a really strong reputation following him, and Oswald, looking for a chance to prove himself, I think needs to be careful to not let that desire to look like an excellent hunter overrule his brain power, because that could be the difference between a make it or break it, is the dual lane for sure, and positioning. And of course, we got Uzi as well on this team. My favorite part about Uzi being the solo laner for this team is he has so much previous synergy lined up with Chapo that I think Uzi is just going to be the perfect plug and play dude for this team. I think Uzi is a nut solo laner. I am honestly surprised that Uzi has not made his way into the SPL yet. I honestly think that he is SPL caliber currently, and I've always viewed Uzi as like, I think if you ask any of the casters, they would tell you the same thing. We all think that Uzi is SPL level, and I'm super excited to see him getting a chance to play alongside of Chapo and Maddie, because those guys have been bros for so long, and I think it'll be pretty good stuff that this team brings about. Plus, this is probably the team that I would expect to do the jankiest things. Out of all of these rosters, I am expecting pizzazz from this team most over anybody else, even more so than Outcold Gaming. I think that Outcold Gaming is a team that could definitely bring a lot of unconventional choices, but Space Agent Gold, I mean, I feel like all of these guys could play any of these roles, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them do some crazy stuff throughout the year. Like, straight up, that's just the way that I look at things. Um, Now we have Team Latam. So we got Chekio, Dracomarino, Warchi, Worst Turtle, and Julio. And all of these guys, if you've been around the Smite community for a while, you'll probably recognize them. They are like lords of the EGL scene over in Europe. A lot of these guys have kind of dipped in and out, like being right there on the cusp of entering pro play, but just falling a little bit short and winding up either in like challengers or minors. And right now, they're all on the same team underneath Team Kessel. And seeing Chekio as the hunter, I think that kind of strikes me a little bit odd. I'm not as familiar with Chekio ADC as some others might be, but I'm really interested to see what he does alongside of Draco Marino. And Draco is probably the one that I'm expecting to see the most leadership from on this team, because I think that mechanically speaking, he's a solid player. I think that he also has a lot of previous background knowledge on a lot of the players that are going to be competing in the SML, because he's also somebody who's just been around the scene for that long. That I think that this will be it'll be a consistent duo lane. I think we can expect consistency from this duo lane. Warchi going back to mid, bless up. It was only a matter of time. I think that this is where Warchi belongs. Not that his hunter was terrible by any means. It's just that you can tell when somebody is better at certain god pools than other things. It's like people tell me all the time, "They're you're a way better jungler than what you are a hunter," and I'm like, dude, I know, but I just love hunter. And I think Warchi's kind of in the same boat here. I'm happy to see him going back to the mid lane. I think that Warchi is a player who has always been pretty well versed in his positioning. I think that he also plays really well around his teammates. He seems to always try to keep the team in mind when he's making his decisions. And I've also heard a lot, you hear a lot of talk behind the scenes and stuff like that. But Warchi allegedly is like one of the bigger shot caller players. So I am hoping to see some good shot calling from him this season. We got Worst Turtle in Jungle. And Worst Turtle, from what I can remember, his God pool probably feels the most limited out of any of these junglers. I mean, it's kind of a tie between Johnny, but I will get to that later. I think that this is where things could get a little bit iffy, is because I don't know how this pairing is going to go between Warchi and Worst Turtle. But I do think that Worst Turtle is a he's a good player. I think he'll be okay. I think it'll be okay. Plus, with so much, with all the background experience that Warchi has in competitive and with a lot of the scene, I think that he'll also be able to give a lot of good leadership to Worst Turtle. And then, of course, Julio. I mean, Julio is somebody who has been playing solo lane for as long as I can remember. I don't think you can really go wrong with Julio in solo, but at the same time, I think that Julio needs to be careful to not get or to not isolate himself over in solo lane. One thing that I have noticed a lot of times from the times that I have seen Julio in slight competitive play is that he has a tendency to kind of tunnel vision on the lane, and I don't even think it's just Julio alone. I think that Julio and Worst Turtle have both shown tendencies in the past to like tunnel vision on the lane. So I want to see them be a little bit more team oriented, and then kind of to see how that breaks down. But they've got Alpha Jackal as their coach, one of the few teams that does have, I think, a super serious coach. And it'll be interesting to see how Alpha Jackal's time in the SPL is going to um, relay over to this team, because there could also be slight language barrier issues. Although I'm fairly confident all of these guys speak English. Um, I don't know how strong their English is, and I know that Alpha Jackal doesn't speak a lick of Spanish, so I hope that there aren't any like communication barriers. But I think if that were to be a serious issue, they probably wouldn't have asked Alpha Jackal to be their coach. So um, Abadakkel's got the knowledge, and whether or not this team is able to turn, on paper to live performance, that'll be something that we just have to wait and see, I think. Um, Flashpoint up next. Caspanify and Fusify, that's a dual lane as old as time itself at this stage. I think that these two definitely belong together, and they seem to only play well around each other. They've both broken off in the past from competing on the same team with each other, but I'm very happy to see them going back to it, because I think that this is a pairing that just needs to be together. It's kind of like the Jeff and Bear in my mind. I just think that these two play so well off of each other that they just really should not separate themselves ever again. And so, really looking forward to seeing what Caspanify and Fusify are able to bring to this dual lane. Um, Farkrick in mid lane. Farkrick's kind of newer, I think, to this stage, and I'm saying that only because there's so much talent involved in the SML right now in comparison to previous years. I think that this is by far going to be one of the most aggressive EU SMLs that we have ever seen, based off these rosters. And I know that Farkrick has been playing mid lane for a very long time, but EGL, Challenger Cup, that sort of stuff, it's like even minor league, it's all a little bit different. But having Johnny by his side helps out a lot here, I think, because these two also, I think, are players that I feel like they could play the game even if they only had to use VGS. Like, they just know each other that well that they will be able to work things out between the other. And like I said, I think the biggest limitations for this team, for Flashpoint, would probably fall into that jungle role. I just want to see Johnny play something else. I mean, granted, teams have to force him to play something else first other than AO, but I want to see how Johnny performs when he isn't on those like staple picks like the AO. I want to see him be challenged, because if Johnny can still perform the same way that he does on AO on any other jungler in Smite, then the SML, the EU SML, is in trouble, because this guy is an absolute beast on AO. He is without a doubt one of the few players that I think could legitimately one trick his way through competitive play. And when you have a player, like, it doesn't matter if he's got a sick AO, the fact that other teams would potentially have to ban that god against him, I think, says enough. And that is still an awesome thing to have, because you're essentially forcing a team to waste a ban if things go that route. So Johnny has former experience as well. Of course, he's been around the SML scene for a while, so I think that this is a really solid pairing, and it should pan out pretty well for them. And of course, Sibby in that solo lane, you're just looking at a really consistent solo laner. I don't think Sibby's really somebody who's going to lose a lane. I don't think he's somebody who's really going to get super far ahead in the lane. He's kind of just there. He kind of reminds me of Demi to an extent, where he's probably going to look to play for the team fight more so than playing for himself. And I think that's a good way to be focused around season 6. Next up, we got Sanguine, yet another Team Latam, rising up. I think that these guys are definitely making waves, but I'm happy to see these guys get their chance. Netrioid, Rongyu, Shinto, Panitam, and Hardcore, they all...
Who the fuck jukes that way?
Thank you so much, FTC Web. But all of these guys, in my mind, belong in the SML, and I am super excited to see how they're going to perform, because I think that this is probably one of the best opportunities that a Latin team could possibly have for trying to compete against like EU and NA and all that stuff. I just am super excited to see what these guys are capable of. I think that this is going to be another very aggressive roster from these guys. not so much Netrioid or the dual lane. I think the dual lane has kind of recognized their place as like needing to be a lane that just doesn't die off cooldown. So I mostly just want to see things between Shinto and Benitum because Benitum's who I really want to emphasize on here. Jungle mid or season 5, 6 has been so jungle mid oriented that I do have some concerns because I've seen Benitum go 20 and 0. I've also seen Benitum go 0 and 20. So consistency is what we're really looking for out of Benitum and making sure that he doesn't let the lead play him. At times, I do feel like he can kind of let his lead go to his head, and then he starts making a little bit more reckless decisions, which could then result in deeper punishments at this level of play. So that's something that I think Sanguine's going to have to keep an eye on. But Shinto is such an experienced player, and I got to say, I'm always impressed whenever I watch Shinto play. I think that this guy is a nuts mid laner, and I am so happy to see him get his chance to play here with Sanguine because he is somebody that works hard and you can expect 110% from Shinto every single time he takes to the game. So I don't think there's really a way to go wrong here with Shinto in the mid jungle. And I think if anything, Shinto should be the one trying to be a little bit. He needs to be the one I think to take a little bit more leadership on this team and keep and make sure that Benitham doesn't get out of control with the jungle position. I think he's going to be a great asset for keeping Benitham under reins. Then you've got Hardcore in the solo lane. Not really a whole lot to say on Hardcore here. I haven't really had a chance to see too much myself of his gameplay from the solo lane position. I do think though with the rest of this roster, it's hard to go wrong from the solo lane. I think that he also needs to just be somebody who I think he could actually possibly get away with playing more for the laning phase because I'm just expecting that strong of a show out from the other lanes on this roster that I think Hardcore is going to have a little bit of an easier time kind of deciding between whether he wants to take a more aggressive route or a more passive team-based position. And then of course, Oxy as a sub coach, he's just another player. He's competed himself in minor league stuff, so he's just got LAN experience, he's got player experience, and I think that that'll all end up being great tools for this team to like utilize and kind of just sit things through. I'm expecting this team to be one of the teams that spends a lot of time on VOD review. I think that this team's going to spend a ton of time on VOD review, and I'm really excited to see what they cook up. Next up, we got Simplicity with Streak Up, Genetics, Death Panther, Fails, and Maniac. On paper, I think this team looks stronger than what they actually are. I think out of all the teams we've covered so far, this is probably one of the weaker looking SML teams. Um, Mostly because I think Maniac is solid, but Solo Lane might not be able to direct things as much as you would want, and Fails he's just really hit or miss. I do think Fails was a bit limited just because he didn't seem like he really had that strong of synergy in the past with a lobster. So I think that if Fails has found that with Death Panther, then things could fare a little bit better here. But I think one of the main reasons why Death Panther has kind of always struggled in between that threshold of SML and SPL is because his god pool honestly is limited. I think, and so
Who the fuck
if we
jukes that
see,
way?
thank you so much, Lovey Tiny. If we see a little bit more flexibility from Death Panther, then I think things could end up going well. But the problem here is that either Fails or Death Panther has to be popping off for this team to work. And I'm just not sure that you're really going to see that solo carry potential from Fails as much as you would from Death Panther. And I don't know if that might throw things out of whack just because I really just want to see how these two interact with each other for a couple of games before I can really solidify an opinion around them. But so far, I can't say that I am, all that sold on this being like a top SML team for EU. Genetics in the support role. Not much to say on Genetics either. I mean, he came to LAN. He had a great showing at LAN when he was with the guys from Insignum, and then he got himself banned competitively. So he kind of screwed his team on opportunity to get to Worlds. I think he's just a player that needs to get his, attitude and behavior in check. And if he has those things, underneath the belt, then they're good to go. But I do think that that's somebody who could be really hard to work with when you have a teammate that you know to have behavioral issues in an environment. So if these guys can keep him cool headed, then I think they'll be set. Genetics did have a really strong showing on the supports that he did play at LAN. I think that he is definitely a strong player mechanically speaking. How well that's going to mesh with the rest of this or the rest of this roster is, up in the air. But I think individually speaking, he's a pretty talented player. Streak Up, again, he's a hunter. Streak Up's kind of, I think he's just going to take whatever direction genetics leads him in. Streak Up seems to be more of a player that kind of just wants to be told what to do, and that could be a possible issue in the future once they start going up against teams that are, a little bit more experienced, like those in the USML. But I definitely think that this will be a great chance for Streak Up to kind of polish his hunter skills because there is so much talent in the EUSML and NASML as far as hunters are concerned. There's a lot of well-versed hunters in here and competing, and so I think it'll be a great chance for him to kind of rise up to the occasion. Um, Last but not least, Team Cryptic. Here's a name we all know far too well, Benny Q as the hunter. Benny Q said he would stop trolling for season 6. I gotta see it first to believe it. Benny Q is someone who definitely lets his lead play himself. He is sometimes overly cocky, and it shows in his gameplay. I mean, there's a reason why he's part of the team. Or he actually, no, there's not a reason he's part. He was the sole reason why his team was the first ever team to lose to an Oshi team on LAN. Um, so Benny Q, as far as mechanics are concerned, the dude's good. I no one can take that away from him. He is a good player. But I'm skeptical that he's going to be able to maintain the necessary decorum to carry himself throughout the entirety of a season. And I think with that in mind, there could be some possible team issues. And I'd see this as being one of the first teams to make roster changes. I really do. These are all players that have been involved in the past with like the roster changing fiasco that takes place in minor league. So I would prefer to see this team stick together. I think that there is a lot of individual talent lying in this roster, but I am not certain that they're going to be a team that plays super well together. But if they can play really well together and play really well off of each other, then they're going to be in the clear. But again, I really just have to see how they perform on paper first because to me, this feels a little bit more like uh, it's like a try hard meme team. It's probably the nicest way I could put it. It's just that I think Yuji and BennyQ have both just struggled for so long with like their comms with teams in the past, and like this isn't information that the public is necessarily aware of. But I mean, for example, BennyQ trolled his team at LAN. He trolled his entire team at LAN, and I've never seen Cope Baby get more upset at somebody in my life. But if he's able to, make up for that stuff with this season, then I think it could be a really solid duo lane with Mineral. Mineral's a pretty consistent support player. Dude knows the ins and outs of the role. I definitely think that if he can help BennyQ stay serious, that this could be a very deadly duo lane. Sops in the mid lane, another one that I've enjoyed seeing this semi role change. I say semi because Sops is always I think toggled in between ADC and mid lane, and now is just fully deciding to commit to mid lane since he's got Benny Q to rely on in the dual lane. And Sops from the mid lane position, I think you might not even notice that he was formerly a Hunter main because Duke can play Soul, Duke can play Chronos, he can also play Hunters in mid. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this team maybe being one of the few teams to still opt for that double Hunter setup in season 6. It'll be really curious to see how it plays out, but I think Sops, you just get a consistent gamer there. There's really no other way to put it. He's just a really consistent player. And following up on that, Yuji Box. Yuji came really close to being in the SPL. He was almost a jungler for Splice once upon a time ago before Season 5 began and got benched from it a couple of weeks before the league actually started. A large part of the reason for that is just that his comms were pretty bad, and you can't have that from a jungler. You need a jungler that's going to be vocal. You need a jungler that's going to be able to command a team, and that's something that I do have concerns for from this team because Sops and Yujibox, they're both relatively quiet and timid personalities. And so the concern here is if they're not communicating with the rest of their team, how on earth is anybody supposed to be on the same page? So I think I just want to see these two be vocal. I want to see these two lead their team. I don't want to see them sit on the sidelines and just have somebody like Mineral or Zero to call the shots. I want to see these two take direction. And if they are able to achieve that, then I think we can see some promising things from Cryptic. But personally, I think that it's going to be a little bit flaky at the start and might possibly smooth out along as the year progresses in the minor league. And Zero's the last one. He's a EU player. Well, I know him as Alexi. You guys might also know him as Alexi, but Zero is somebody who has also kind of just been right there on the cusp of entering pro play and then always just like semi fallen short a little bit or just had somebody else picked up instead. I think SML is a very fitting spot for him. As far as this roster is concerned, however, I do have my doubts. I am not really sure what to make of seeing Zero with the rest of this team because I think, if anything, Zero could potentially be that like catalyst that gets Benny Q and Mineral on like more of a trolley cycle. I definitely think that all of these players are outside of Sops are definitely players that fall a little bit too hard into the meme team category. Um, and Fates doesn't help. Seeing Fates on this team does not help in the slightest for that with that perspective from me. But I think Fates is a solid sub coach to have. If they are all serious about the SML, this could be a very potent roster. Unfortunately, from my takeaway of like having watched these players for years, I just don't really see that coming to fruition. But I'm still curious to see how they perform alongside of the rest of the North American teams. And as far as overall ratings are concerned in EU and NA, I think I would just have to range things as I think Armada is probably the number one SML team right now, on paper at least. And I really just want to see how Armada does. Space Station Gold, um, I'm really curious to see how they wind up also. But I definitely think that between Chapo and Mask alone, that's enough to win me over. I could definitely see them being a second, in between second and first place for NA SML. I know people are gonna say I'm biased because of Maddie, but honestly, that team's Chapo and Mask in my place, in my mind, because Dual Lane is just not gonna have the same sort of impact as mid jungle would in season 6 unless some drastic changes happen. And I think we might see some of those from the mid year stats, but for the beginning, I'm just skeptical on that. So I'm looking more towards Chapo Mask there. After that, I think that I would definitely say Sanguine is also a team that could they could be anywhere between first through second or even third. It's very competitive, I think, between Sanguine, Space Station Gold, and Armada. I think all of those players are hungry for wins out on Sanguine and hungry to prove to themselves and prove to like I think the public that LATAM is more than just a meme. Like they are definitely full of like top-notch competitive players, and they are definitely willing to showcase that. And then last but not least, like I said, Team Cryptic is probably going to be the one falling towards that bottom end spectrum for me from NA. For EU, looking at these rosters, um, I think Flashpoint might have been my first choice team just because of the fact that these players have all played with each other in the past and they know each other so well that I think their synergy could be enough to give them an early lead over the other SML teams. But in the end, I'm going to give it to Out Cold Gaming as the team that I'm predicting to be number one from the European SML. I think that Out Cold Gaming this is just a consistent, solid roster. I don't think that any of these players are really going to cost anything outside of Frosty. Frosty was really the only big question mark in my mind because I've known Frosty for a long time, played with him even in scrims, and he can be very hit or miss, but because of the fact that he's with Pretty Prime,
Another
that
one.
has definitely swayed or persuaded me to lean more into the Pretty Prime Frosty Egg Dream here. Um, After that, it's a tie for me between Gesso and where were they at? And Flashpoint. Like these two, anything could happen between these two teams. They've got Alpha Jackal on their backside. That is probably going to be the main make or break it point is to see how Alpha Jackal as a coach is going to be able to shift the outcome um, of this clash, I should say. So that'll be really curious to see. For right now, though, like I said, I'll give Team Kessel second. I'll give Flashpoint third, and then I'll leave Simplicity for last personally, just because I think that this will be really streaky, no pun intended, as far as their win loss record is concerned. Um, and yeah, outside of that, I hope that this was a very good little informational video on my takes on the ins and outs of the Smite Minor League from, and a lot of this perspective came from me judging things based off of having played with a lot of these players in ranked, because I did participate in European rank for like 2 years running before coming back over to the NA side of things, and so I thought that that was really cool, getting a little bit of insight as far as how like the EU scene could be. It's been a while since I've queued any European ranked, but I've seen all of these players for a very long time competing in those sorts of, Challenger Cup, EGLs, minor league, and some of them even in the pro league. So that's why I just wanted to give a little bit of my thought and takeaway on things and how I think the SML is actually going to shake up. So you guys can let me know what your thoughts are on the SML and who you're expecting to be number one. And other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed my little minor league video, and that'll do it for me.